Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the Cinco De Mayo celebrations here at Whisky Lock headquarters. So in this video I'm going to be looking at Ilegal Mezcal, and this one is the bottle that I showed at the end of my review for Sierra Reposado. This one is not Reposado, it's completely unaged. And if you look at the colour of that from a distance, you might not have actually been able to tell that this wasn't an empty bottle, because it's almost entirely clear. And that's not unusual when you're talking about quality mezcal and tequila. The Mexicans, they're obviously not one for artificially colouring their spirits. They're much more honest and much more open-minded to a paler spirit, because they know that colour's not everything. One of the first things that I probably do need to address before I get into this video though is, what is mezcal? Because I know that a lot of people aren't going to know, or a lot of people are going to be a bit confused about this. So mezcal is a Mexican spirit made from the agave plant, and it can be any of the plants in the agave family. And like I said in my previous video, they get this large spiky cactus type plant and they hack all the spikes, because they're actually several feet in diameter. They hack all the spikes off and they're left with the heart of the plant, which they call a piña, which is roughly football sized, and they roast them. In the case of tequila, it's generally done in an oven, and in the case of a lot of premium craft mezcal, they actually do it the traditional old school way, where they throw it into an earthen pit and they fire roast them in the ground. And because of this fire roasting in these earthen pits, they actually pick up quite a lot of smoky, almost phenolic compounds. So straight away, if you're a fan of your smoky Scotch whisky, I'd definitely recommend giving a smoky mezcal a try. Now, not all mezcal is smoky, but a lot of them tend to be. And this one here, the Ilegal Joven, there's actually 3 expressions from the Ilegal distillery. There's, I believe it's a Joven, which is the unaged stuff. There's, I believe, a Reposado, I think they call it, and an Añejo, which is the oldest expression. But all of them, they're all, compared to whiskey, very, very young. As I mentioned, the Joven is completely unaged, no aging at all. The Reposado, the expression up from that, I believe is aged for 4 months. And then the Añejo is aged for 13 months. So it's something that in the world of Scotch would be illegal to bottle because it's less than 3 years old. But if it were allowed, it would be classed as a 1-year-old spirit. Another key difference between tequila and mezcal is that tequila has to be made with 100% blue agave, which is a specific agave plant in the agave family, whereas mezcal, being a broader category, doesn't have to be made with blue agave. It can use any of those plants in that family. But you do see at the top of this bottle, it does say, you probably won't be able to see that, but it does say in gold font, 100% agave. The name of the distillery, Ilegal, is quite interesting as well. The reason for that, it literally translates into what you'd think it means illegal, because the people that set this distillery up originally, they obviously weren't paying their taxes, and they were basically moonshiners and bootleggers. So they've called the distillery and their company Ilegal. There's a little homage to their illicit beginnings. So tequila and mezcal, similar spirits, and I'm not sure if I mentioned that tequila is actually a subcategory of mezcal. It's kind of like how you've got cognac and armagnac and bourbon and American whiskey, or even Scotch whiskey and Scotch single malt whiskey. All boils down to mezcal generally tends to be a little bit smokier, a little bit more rustic, a little bit more characterful. And when it comes to picking a classification, some mezcal is tequila, but all tequila is mezcal. And I should probably also mention the other thing that everyone's going to be thinking about. Does it come with a worm in it? Well, some of it does, but it's not traditional. It's a bizarre and silly marketing technique, which is a really recent invention. And if you do see a worm in a bottle of mezcal or tequila, my advice would be to not humour them with your money. Anyway, let's get back to this particular bottle that we've got here. So as I said, it is unmatured, so the age statement is 0. But with a lot of mezcal, that's actually, in my opinion, that can actually be a good thing. The actual ingredients and the process that mezcals and tequilas go through, it really lends itself to that spirit-focused, spirit-driven style. And that style is really one where, in my opinion, when you do age them, it often doesn't add anything positive. I actually think that a lot of tequila, if you can try an unaged and an aged expression from the same distillery, I think that you get maximum flavour from a lot of the younger expressions, and the older expressions which are barrel aged, they tend to add a lot of heavy vanilla. It's the same problem that you get in a lot of modern expressions of Scotch whisky. They really become vanilla bombs, and it covers up a lot of the character. So absolutely don't be afraid to buy unaged tequilas and mezcals. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that it really demands a completely different way of thinking to what we have in Scotch and bourbon. Especially with Scotch, you have this emphasis on cask. And this has always been the way. I mean, going back over the last few decades, we've had varying changes in the belief that age is good. And I think most of us would agree that you need at least some years in the cask, or at least years spent in good casks. But with something like mezcal, because you're removing the impact from the cask, it's making it all completely about the spirit. It's all about the ingredients and the process. With Scotch, you're pressured into this thinking that you have to have a good spirit, or at least a compatible spirit with the casks, and then you have to rely on getting some good casks. And if you have bad casks, or the casks don't match the spirit, then it doesn't work. But with mezcal, because they've got a spirit that doesn't require aging, they can completely bypass that, and it all becomes about the ingredients and the spirit itself. And more than that, you can't rely on casks to fix your mistakes. And before I actually pour some of this and get into it, I did briefly mention the colour. It is almost entirely clear, so the chances of there being any unnatural colouring in this, I think, is slim to 0. And in terms of filtration as well, it doesn't say anything on the bottle, but if you look down at the very bottom edge of the inside of the bottle, you might be able to see, if I just angle that towards you, you can see a slight brown ring around the outside of the bottom of the bottle. Now that's actually on the inside, and it's separated and settled out of the spirit. If I try and keep that angle towards the camera and tip it up, you may have seen briefly there that sediment has gone back into suspension. So I would say that it's absolutely not chill filtered. It's probably very lightly filtered with a barrier filter, if at all. So if you like your uncoloured and non-chill filtered whiskies or spirits, that's another reason to love mezcal. I really do think that this mezcal and a lot of mezcals, they really are an example of an extreme craft presentation, and it's really good to see that, because it's not like with a lot of Scotch distilleries, they've moved over to a craft presentation because they've realised that's what the market wants. It's because the mezcal and tequila worlds, they've never adopted all of these dirty tricks that the Scotch business has been using all of these years. So let's get the cork out and get some in the glass. So you've probably also noticed that this is not a traditional cork stopper. It's also not a screw top. It's actually a roughly cut cork just forced into the bottle and sealed over with wax. So when you get this, the only thing that tells you that it's sealed is that wax around the bottle. I've had a few bottles of Ilegal over the years, and it still always excites me a little bit, just the novelty value of pouring something in the glass that looks like pure water. We'll also mention one more thing, no more delays after this, but this, I believe they are all available in 50 cl bottles, so that's 500 ml. So you do have to be a little bit careful, because you are getting a little bit less for your money, because this stuff isn't cheap. It's definitely nowhere near as cheap as the Sierra supermarket tequila. This stuff you pay kind of between what you'd pay for a 12 and 15-year-old Scotch, but in my opinion it is worth it. Let's see how it smells. So that is hugely different to the cheap basic supermarket tequila from my last video. Even though it's only 2% more, it's still only 40% ABV. It's an incredibly robust and very characterful, quite dirty, fatty, oily, greasy, smoky nose. You can tell that it is the same category. You can tell that it's related to the tequila from my last video, because it has got those sour, salty, bitter and oily notes, a little bit of those grassy, herbaceous agave notes as well. But you've also got some lovely sweet apple and sour lime notes, some lovely fruitiness coming through from the spirit. And it is a really lovely spiritiness. If you've ever done a distillery tour and you've been lucky enough to do one of the tours where they let you smell and taste the cleric, the new make spirit, this is actually not far off. So I would say that the processes and ingredients that go into this, they're every bit on par with a good Scotch distillery. Getting some lovely delicate peach notes in there, as well as a little bit of sweet butteriness. It's quite oily, the butteriness. It's a little bit of a buttery olive oil aroma. Also getting a little bit of a sooty, smoky wood smoke aroma. Maybe a little hint of freshly rolled tobacco. It's also quite a herbal, clove-driven aroma to this one as well as some really nice, and this will be familiar to anyone that likes their really heavy and dirty Islay malts, some really nice farmyard notes. And that in itself is a real acquired taste. Anyone that's watching this that's not a peated whiskey enthusiast will probably think this is completely bizarre, but there's a little note of standing near cowsheds to this one. Let's see how it tastes. Now, I do think that on the palate this one could have done with being a little bit stronger. It's not underpowered, but I think even at 42 or 43% this would have been a little bit better, but it's still a really nice spirit. It's leading with lots of sour and salty notes, and that really moves on to some sort of sour and earthy, sooty smokiness. The spirit in this one really is quite fresh and fruity. It's quite sugary, not overly sweet, and not cloying, the sort of things that you get from a Scotch that's matured in fresh bourbon oak or in a Pedro Ximénez sherry cask. It's not like that. It's still sharp and focused and clean. And I'm also getting something else on the late palate of this one that I really like, and that's a little hint of starchy mashed potato, and that's something that I quite often get in some of the more premium mezcals and tequilas, and I think that starchiness comes through from the agave, and it's something that I really like. Just going to have one more sip and look at the finish. So the finish on this one, the finish on the Sierra Reposado, I think really let it down a little bit, but the finish on this one's really nice. Medium long, I'd say it's sweet and mild. There's a little bit of warm, lingering, farmy soot, and a really nice, just general underlying note of charred agave. And also, it sort of goes without saying, but I need to remind myself to point these things out, there's quite a bit of saltiness to the finish as well. I think I mentioned in my previous video, tequilas and mezcals, I really like how they have this combination of sweet, sour, salty and bitter all merged together. It's something that I think just works so well. And I think anyone that's really got an adventurous palate and they like their characterful whiskies, they really should try something like this Ilegal Mezcal. I actually think that if you're a fan of Ardbeg, because I think Ardbeg has got that wonderful combination of lovely, sharp, strong, characterful, bold spiritiness mixed with that completely uncompromising peat. You've got those two quite different flavours that contrast but also work together really well. If you like that in your Islay whiskies, especially sort of Ardbeg 10-year-old fans, I can see you liking this mezcal as well. So as for a grade, bearing in mind that this, you can't really mark this against Scotch, so this is going to be a mezcal grade, but I'm going to give it a B+, because I think this is a really wonderful, extreme craft presentation of a really wonderful spirit, and I highly recommend it. As for comparing this Joven unaged expression to the Reposado and the Añejo, I have tried the other two, and curiously, I think there's probably batch variation at play here as well, but I thought that the Añejo was actually quite a bit smokier and more medicinal than the Joven, which is really odd. You would think that the less cask influence, the less age you've got, you would think that it would retain more of that smokiness, but that's not what I found. But I think they're all really worth a try. But what I will say is that this Joven expression is almost as good, and it's quite a bit cheaper than the aged expressions. Have made some notes here of some other tequilas and mezcals. If you are looking at getting into tequila and mezcal, or you just want to give it a try, for the more adventurous of you out there, I'd definitely recommend Ilegal, anything by them, and also Chichicapa Mezcal, San Luis del Rio, Enmascarado 45, Kikiriki. There's lots of really great mezcal distilleries out there, and I haven't actually found that many that are really disappointing. It's just some are good and some are really good. So hopefully some of you have been inspired by these two videos to try the world of tequila and mezcal. And if you like or dislike or are indifferent to tequila and mezcal, let me know in the comments below. Happy Cinco de Mayo, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.